another video. In this one, yeah, we're gonna get hands-on. We're gonna get hands-on writing real code for the first time. So let's get started. Programming is not an easy thing. It takes time and consistent practice to get used to. In this module, what we're going to talk about are the core JavaScript building blocks. Now, if you pay attention to this video, you would set yourself up for success because you would lay the groundwork for understanding more advanced JavaScript concepts. Without further ado, let's get started. As you can see here, I have, as you can see here, I have like some of the tutorials from, last time. So this is my workspace. I've sort of like tuned it. If you've downloaded VS Code, it's kind of like the same, but maybe the color is a bit different, and you don't have to worry about that. Okay, you don't have to worry about the color and not get distracted by that. Now, what I want you to do is just create a folder. We're just going to call it module 2 or -2 like that. And you want to click on that folder and then right click and say new file. And in that file, I'm just going to create something for myself just so that we can explain some concepts before we get hands-on. So I'll just create a file, just a markdown file, and I'll just start typing stuff. Okay, cool. So let's go back to the material and just take a look at what we're going to cover today in this module. So we're going to talk about data types, variables, arithmetic and logical operators, basic control structures, and we're just going to summarize the whole module. The goal here is just to, get you familiar with data types and operators and basic control structures in JavaScript. So let's talk about data types in JavaScript. So what are data types? Now, data types, in my opinion, are the building blocks of every programming language, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's, I'm going to change this to a white background. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So use a light background. I kind of feel like the light background is just a lot clearer. You can see things better. All right, cool. So what are data types? Probably toggle this way. So what are data types? Now, computer's slow for a reason. I don't know. So what are data types? So in my opinion, data types are the building block of every programming language. Most of what programmers do just involves manipulating data types. That's it. 90% of what programmers do involves manipulating data types. Okay? And so this is a high level overview of what data types are. They're the building blocks of every programming language. But in layman terms, in simple terms, they are types of data the language understands. So every programming language has its own type of data, but fundamentally data types are the building blocks of every programming language. And there are two types of data types. There are generally two types of data types in a programming language. We have, concrete data types, and we have maybe custom data types. Okay, so data types are the building blocks, right? Without them, they you can't do anything. So for every programming language that exists out there, there are predefined set of data types that are native to this language. We call that concrete data types, and there are data types that you create. We call those custom data types. The term may vary, but this is just the idea. So if you look here, there's a number of data types. So ignore all of this gibberish here. This is the number 1. This is the number 11. That's a data type. That's a type of data. Okay, that's what a type of data. So it's the same in, say, Python. This is a data type. It's a data type. It's the same here. But all of this, in Go, in a language like okay, so I didn't do anything here, but it's a data type. in Ruby, this is a data type. So data type are what? They're the building blocks of what? Every programming language. In simple terms, they are types of data that a language understands. Okay, like the number one. So this is the number one, the number 11. So those are all data types. So what are examples of some examples of concrete data types in JavaScript? All right. What are some examples of concrete data types in JavaScript? Now we have numbers, we have strings, we have Boolean, we have arrays, we have, so we have numbers, string, Boolean, and arrays. So these are the concrete data types in JavaScript, right? So we're going to talk about each of these data types, right? We're going to talk about each of these data types. So like I said, these are the building blocks. For instance, numbers. Numbers are, for example, we have examples include the number 1, 2, 3, the number 3.45, the number 3.17, the number 10, the number minus something, right? The number 0 point this. Those are all numbers. Okay, these are all numbers, and those are all concrete data types. So numbers in JavaScript. There are also other type of numbers, like numbers in different base, but I'm not going to talk about that, right? But the normal numbers from minus to positive, all the numbers on the number line, you can represent them in JavaScript, right? So those are concrete types. Strings include stuff like anything in quotes like this. So the quotation marks you see here, anything in between that are considered strings in JavaScript. So this would be called an empty string. Peter would be called, that's a string. Another string could be hello there, thanks for watching. So that's a string. When a piece of text is enclosed in in two quotation marks, it's called a string. Also, when it's also enclosed in a single quotation mark, it's also a string. Okay, so that's a string. Now we also have Boolean. Boolean includes true and false. Okay, true and false. These are Booleans. Now, one thing about these concrete data types is that they, on your editor, on most code editor, they get special colors. Okay, for instance, here, if I type the number 1, right, I get a different color. If I type the number Simon, I get a different color. You can see that's for 1 is a number type. Simon in quotes is a string, right? True, right? False. You see, they get special colors, and the special colors there just help you understand that these are like types. Okay, they just make it easy so that everything is not in the same color. If I were to write this on a piece of paper like I did here on the right, you can see everything just had the same color. But by creating a file with the extension .js and using an editor like VS Code, everything gets their own color. Okay, so we've talked about these concrete data types. We've got numbers, we've got strings, we've got Boolean, right? So examples like 1, 2, 3, strings, and Boolean. There could be more, but I think that's the concrete data types. JavaScript. Let's see. So JavaScript has some concrete data types. We've talked about We're going to talk about variables. So these are so it's also called primitives. Now the advanced ones I don't want to talk about for now, right? Like you get number type. We've talked about that. But the way I just explained them, it's better to understand for a beginner rather than going through all of this one for now. Okay, so cool. Let's move on. Now, let me know if you have any questions. So we're going to talk about arrays. Arrays are kind of called composite types because they're composed of more than one types. And usually, here's how you represent arrays. To create an array is a collection of types, okay? In JavaScript, an array is a collection of types. So let's say I want to create a composite type, like a type with other types in it. You do that with what we call an array. So an example is an array starts with 2 square brackets, and you could put other types in it. I could put a boolean, which is either a true or false value. I could put a string, which is stuff enclosed in single or double quotes. For instance, 1, 2, 3 is not a number because why? It's enclosed in quotes. So it's a string. 1, 2, 3 is also a string because it's enclosed in single quotes. 1, 2, 3 is a number, right? Why? Because it doesn't have quotes around it. Now, what you've created is what is called an array, okay? You've created an array because an array has more than one types. The more complex types we'll talk about, like objects, but we're not going to get into that for now. Okay, now let's move on. So you might ask that, oh, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is a string, this is a string, and this is a number. And the reason is just because this one has a quote around it, this one has a quote around it, and this one does not. Now, generally in JavaScript and most programming language, you can write numbers because most numbers are natives to computers. They understand them really well. But if you go ahead and say ABC, you're going to run into issue, and you see why. Now, I'm on a markdown file, so you won't get all of this error because this is not a JavaScript file. But if I move over here, and let's do the same thing, let's just create, let me create this array, and let's add something here. So I don't know what your name is, but I'm just gonna guess. I'm gonna say James. That could be your name. Ruth, just name that comes to mind. And let's say 1, 2, 3. Let's add another 1, 1, 2, 3. And let's add true. And let's add ABC. Now, you can see that this ABC here is this valid JavaScript code. We're gonna get to that in a bit. Now, the JavaScript understands concrete types, like the strings that are always enclosed in quote, the numbers that are just numbers, negative and positive numbers, Boolean that can only be true or false, and arrays that are like combination of many other types. Now, what is this ABC? It doesn't have a quote around it. It's not a number. It's just a text, right? So this should be a text type because we already agreed that strings are anything with quotes. So what is this guy? What does this guy mean? Well, we've typed a lot of stuff, but we can't, see anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to my module 1 folder, and I'm going to create a file, and I'm just going to call that, let's call it data-types.js. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm just going to copy all of this. I'll close this files and just come back to the data type and paste this one. Now, how do you run your JavaScript code? To run your JavaScript code means you're asking the computer to interpret what is in this file. Not the computer exactly, but what we call the JavaScript interpreter. The JavaScript interpreter is a computer program that takes a file like this with JavaScript code in it and tells you or outputs or interprets that file. So in this case, we're going to run this file and see if anything happens. So to run this file with the JavaScript interpreter, you're going to come to terminal. You just click on new terminal. Just wait for it to load up. Just ignore that. That's my settings. I'm just gonna clear that out. And now, remember I said you're gonna do node v to ensure you have node installed. Now we're gonna run this file with node, and what you're gonna give, what you're gonna type next is a space. So node space. You're gonna right click on this file and say copy path, and you're gonna right click and click paste, and then you hit that and you're gonna get this error. Now that's one way to do it. Another way is just to say node, right? And then you just type the name of the folder where the file is, module-2, and then add a slash, the name of the file, data-types.js. And there you go. So that's how to run your file. So you run this file and cool, there we go. So I can just hit the up arrow on my keyboard. I need to bring that same command again, and I can run that same file. Now, if you don't want to always do that, you can click on run, and there's a program I'd like you to install, but I'll say for now I wouldn't want you to use any program because I prefer you run the code by hand. But you can also right click here and say copy relative path if you don't want to copy the full path, and just say node, and then right click and paste, and then enter, and that's fine. Now, cool. Now, there's something happened here. Node, which is a JavaScript program or computer program that interprets a JavaScript file, tried to interpret the file, but it got an error here saying reference error. Okay, so reference error ABC is not defined. So what does this mean? It means that it does not really understand what ABC is because it's not part of the types that we talked about, right? We talked about numbers, strings, and there are rules for numbers. They're just numbers. You know, strings must be enclosed in quotes, either single quotes and double quotes. Booleans could either be true or false. You know, arrays are composite types, you know, but like it didn't make mention of anything about something like letters without quotes around them. Now, what happens if I put a quote around this? And let's run the program again. You always have to run the program to see the output. Now, this time around, I did not get an error. I'm going to clear the screen with clear. This time around, I did not get an error. Why? Why is that? And that's because by taking this out, the JavaScript program does not really understand what this is. So anytime there's a letter, usually a letter, it could also be alphanumeric. It could be a letter with a composition of number. But as long as it starts with a letter and it's not a reserved word, so there are certain reserved words in JavaScript. And reserved words are words that are also native to a programming language. You're not allowed to use them because they mean special thing. Some of the, reserved words, you could call them reserved keywords, right? My spelling. You could call them reserved keywords. You know what? Let's just ignore reserved words. So you could call them reserved keywords. So some of them includes of, let, const, var, function, while, do, and probably many more. Okay, objects. I think that's a keyword. Not sure. I'm gonna take that out because I'm not sure. But yeah, these are some of the keywords. Now, but the JavaScript program does not really understand the ABC here. That's because it doesn't really know what that means. So when you have a string, when you have a text, like a word, but it has no quotes around it, the JavaScript program does not really understand what that means. And the reason is because of one thing I'm going to explain. But let's run this program again and we're going to get the error. Now, This is why I introduce variables. So because this is not a concrete type, you'd have to create your own type in a way. You'd have to tell the computer that this means something. If you wanted to give ABC a meaning, right, you'd have to do it in the form of what we call a variable, right? You're going to do it in the form of what we call a variable. Now, how can I fix this error? Now, you can fix this error in several ways. Put a quote around it, but that makes it a string. When you run this, you're not going to get an error, right? What if I take the quote out? There's another way of fixing it. Now, one way of fixing it is saying var ABC, and if I do that, I don't get an error this time. Why? Because now I sort of have told the computer that this is a type that I'm creating, okay? And we're going to talk about variables and types and all that. But what you've done is you've told the computer that, hey, ABC is a type I'm creating, so don't yell out when I run the program. And this leads us to our next topic called variables. So what are variables? Right? So I hope you understand data types clearly. They're just what? Let's do a review of that topic. So they're the building block of every programming language. In simple terms, what are they? They're types of data the language understands, right? The language didn't understand ABC until we told it that, hey, ABC means something, okay? And then now it didn't yell at us anymore, right? And we talked about numbers, strings, booleans, and arrays. Arrays being the composite types that can hold many other types. We talk about reserved words. And let's wrap that, let's move on to the next part, which is variable and constants. So we're going to talk about variables and constants. Now, what are variables and what are constants? Now, variables, they are areas in a computer memory. They are used to hold types, right? They're used to hold types, right? They are areas in the computer memory. They're used to hold types, right? So they are containers. You put types in variables, right? So there's a lot of definition for variables. When you hear the word variable, there's a lot of things that comes to mind. People say they're containers. People say, they hold stuff. But in summary, variables hold types, right? You put types in variables, right? But a layman definition is that variables are containers. And the reason why people call them containers is because you can change what's in there, right? And we're going to see examples of that, right? We're going to see examples of that. Now, I was able to fix that error by saying, that ABC. That's because now I told the computer that, hey, I want to put a type in ABC. Or I'm going to put a type in ABC, although there's no type in ABC now. And the computer say, okay, yeah, you can have ABC. I don't have it as a reserved word. You can have it all you want. I don't care, right? Because, it's ABC. And what happens if this were like a reserved word, like maybe if or off? If I made this an off and I try to run the program, I get this error about off is not defined. What if I try to define off? What happens? Let's see what happens. Well, it didn't run. And it kind of run, but you should never do this. And I'll tell you why now. If I were to add, I think it's this. Let's see. If I were to add this and run this program again. Okay, I don't think. Just give me 1 second. Use strict JavaScript. Yep, it should be use strict. You put this at the end of a file, and I wonder why it did not. So let me not get carried away by this issue. But stay away from using keywords for now, and I'm going to explain why that's the case. But let's undo everything we have, here and go back to the basics. So let's talk about variables now. I talked about variables being they're areas in computer memory. They're used to hold types. They're containers. You put types in variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file here in module 2. We're going to call this variables.js. And we're going to create our first variable today, and we're going to put a type in it. So let's create a variable name, right? So we're going to say var name equals to, and we're going to call this, let's just put anything in it. So remember I said variables are used to hold types. So the way you put a type in a variable is by using the equals to sign. So you start with the var, which is a keyword that means, hey, you're saying, hey, I'm creating a custom name or a custom order, and I want to put a type in this thing so that I could always refer to this instead of referring to the type, right? For instance. So here, I'm just going to call this S to make it easy. And I'm going to put a really long string in it. So remember, strings are anything in quotes. I am happy to be on YouTube sharing my knowledge. This is exciting. Let's wrap this. So I'm going to go to view and wrap because I don't want to scroll. And you can see here that I have this long string in the variable S. And why did I do this? Now, let me print this out. This is the first time you're going to print something out because I haven't told you about the console.log statement. The console.log statement is used to print something out on your screen. So for instance, I'm going to clear my terminal area with clear, and I'm going to run the same command with node and then the path to the file. But this time around, I know the path to the file is variables.js. You should do this by hand. Stay away from using any software. And I can hit tab, and you can see I didn't get any output back from the interpreter, right? So for me to see the output, I would have to type console.log. Console.log in other languages, in Ruby it's puts, it means put something on the screen. In Python it's prints. In Go it's also print line or prints, right? So console.log means just show me something, right? Show me something. And show me what? You could give it a type. In this case, a variable name. So I'm going to run this with again. And now you can see I have an output on the screen. Now you can see I have a concrete type like a string here, but I store that type in a variable S, right? And I print the output with console.log S. Nothing stops you from taking this and putting it here, right? And running the program. It still works, right? Because at the end of the day, you have a concrete type. But by creating a variable, we said a variable is an area in computer memory. We use the old type. Now this variable holds the type string, right? And we can tell the computer that rather than having to type all of this, I could just find a shorter way to refer to this thing, right? And instead of saying console.log, I am happy to be on YouTube sharing my knowledge, this is exciting, I could just say console.log s, which is shorter. Now, one of the reasons they're called variables is because they change. What does that mean? It means you can change the value of the variable. Now, when you try to make a variable, you use the var keyword followed by the name of the variable. So how to declare a variable. So when you make a variable, let me say how to make a variable. The act of making a variable is called declaring a variable. Declaring a variable involves two steps. Use one of the variable keywords, let or var, followed by the variable name, then an equal to sign, then an equal to, and the type. Okay, so here's a syntax, right? Here's a syntax for that. So you either say var or ignore this confusing. So you either say var or let's equals to type, right? So that's how you declare a variable. You either use var or let's. We've been using var for a while. You could also use let's. Now, a variable, oh sorry, a variable can be reassigned, right? Hence the name variable, because it varies. All right, so what does it mean by a variable can be reassigned? So now I have a type of string stored in the variable s. How do I change that value? Okay, how do you change that value? Now, if you go ahead and you log this out, you're gonna see I am happy. But what if I want to change that value? Reassigning a variable. So you take the variable name s, it's then equals to, and then you put another type in it. In this case, I'm going to put this number in there, right? And what happens when I try to print out this, when I ask the computer to interpret this? Now tell me what you think. Do you think it's going to print out, I'm going to clear the screen. Do you think it's going to print out, I am happy to be on YouTube sharing my knowledge? Or do you think it's going to just print out 3.15? 3.15. If you guess 3.15, you guess correctly. As you can see, it's 3.15. For variables, you can change the types that are stored in variables. So now I have removed the type string, and I have added a number in that type. Now, some programming languages would not allow you to do this. A lot of, we call those languages typed languages. For instance, TypeScript would not let you do this. But because this is not a TypeScript tutorial, it's a JavaScript tutorial, you're allowed to do this. In a language like TypeScript, variables must hold, most cases, must hold the type that they've been defined to hold. For instance, I don't want to get into that, but when we do a TypeScript tutorial, we'll talk about that. But this is JavaScript, and it's an amazing language. It's a language that lets you express and be yourself. So now I've changed the value, and you can do this by, I don't have to use the var keyword. You only use the var or the let keyword when you're declaring a variable, okay? Well, when you're reassigning a value to the variable, you get rid of that. You take the variable name and equals to sign, and then you put a new value. In this case now, I'm going to put another value, an array. I'm going to put days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, and let's print out the value again. And you see now I have another value. So you can change what you put in a variable. It's like a container where you can just change the things that are in it. Okay, so let's wrap up with a few things about variable. Now you could also use a let's. Okay, this could be a let's, right? This could be a let's. And it still works. Now, an assignment for you is go read up on the difference between var and let's. Okay, I'm not going to tell you that in this video. That's an assignment for you. Go read up on the and when you do, just comment in the video, and I would thumbs up if you're correct with the difference. But an assignment for you is go read up on the difference between var or let's. Again, if you're watching this video at this point and you haven't subscribed, make sure you do subscribe. All right, cool. Let's move on to constants, which is the next part we're going to talk about. So you can see here that we've talked about this, but let's talk about constants. Constants. Now, what are they? Now, this is a term everyone is familiar with. If you speak English, you're most likely familiar with constant. But constant simply means something that does not change, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive when people say change is the only constant, right? We don't want to get into that idiom for now. But when you say something is constant, it means it's always going to be that thing. Now, there are cases where you don't want something to change, right? because they would never change throughout your program, throughout the problem you're trying to solve. For instance, maybe interest rates. Maybe you're building a banking application and there's a fixed interest rate, it's a constant, and it's not going to change. Then you're going to set that value as a constant. Or maybe the value of pi. The value of pi, I think it's 3.145, right? That's the value of pi, if I'm correct. Yeah, that's the value of pi. Okay, 3.145. Value of pi would not change. It's always going to be constant. The speed of light, right? Acceleration due to gravity. You know, those numbers that are constants, that are always the same, right? They're always the same. Maybe speed limits, you know, in a certain area. It depends on the program you build. And just think about it. Take some time and think about what are those things that don't change. And they don't always have to be numbers, right? It could always be another type. Remember I said variables. What are variables? I said, you know, they're areas in computer memory. They're used to hold types. They're containers for types. You put types in variables. So a constant, on the other hand, a constant holds types that cannot change. So whatever type you put there will not change. And let's see that in action. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call it constants.js. And what I'm going to do, sorry, I need to see because we need to get moving. So the video is getting long. I need to cut it off, but I need to wrap up with variables and constant, and we'll continue with this other ones later on. All right, cool. So let's talk about constant and end the video here, and we'll continue on another video. So what are constants? Constants are kind of variables. Look, I want to say constants old types are containers that old types that do not change. To declare a constant, you use the const keyword. It is generally a good idea to name constants with capital letters. For example, constants my age equals 21. Let's just make that up. Right? Constant my age equals 21. Right? Now, let's see what constant look like. So I'm going to create a constant and I'm going to call it pi. It's always a good idea to name constant in capital letter. You could as well just do them in small letter. And for variables and constant, there are rules to naming them. For instance, when you create a variable to hold a type, do not start with a number. You must start with a letter or an underscore, but always start with a letter. For instance, the variable here, s, I started with this. If I started with 2, I'm going to run into an issue if I try to run that program. Okay, so always start with a letter. So I'm going to create a constant here. I'm going to call this pi, and I'm going to assign it the value 3.145. Okay, now that I'm done with this, I'm going to print out the value. Console.log pi. And I'm going to print that out. I print out the wrong file, so I have to tell it to print constants.js. 3.145. Let's do the same thing. Let's change the value of a constant. Let's change the value of pi. We're that powerful. Let's change the value of pi to 2.5. Boom, we got an error. Why? It's saying you're trying to assign to a constant variable, meaning you can't change the value. right? You can't. It's not allowed. You can't do that. We don't do that here. So a constant, when you declare a variable when you declare a container for your type, which is a constant variable, when you declare a container for your type and it's a constant, you cannot change the value. Trying to change the value would cause the computer or the program to error out. Okay, and you got a type error, assignment to constant variable. Now go ahead and experiment with this, and we're going to end this part here. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comment section. The goal of this whole thing is to build the fundamental, knowledge that you need to build upon more complex stuff. Programming is very complex, but here's the thing. When you start with the foundation, as simple as these concepts are, they can get complex. But when you understand these parts, when you understand that variables are what? They're containers for types. So the building blocks of every programming language out there. In simple terms, they're the data that the language understands. When you understand that there are concrete data types, which we've been talking about, you understand your reserved words, and you play around this concept, you'll be able to build upon more complex objects when we talk about them. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to talk about arithmetic and logical operator, and then basic control structures. But right now, take your time, play around with variables and constant. If you have questions about them, put them in the comment section. And I wish you all the best in your journey to become a programmer. I'd say have a wonderful day. Keep watching, stay tuned. Let me know what you think about the video, and peace out.